Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Unger, and I'm with Harlan's Media. Prior to this, I was working with Tom Tresser on the TIFF Illumination Project, and we uncovered the TIFF projects that were going on in the Hermosa district. And now I'm with Harlan's Media as a reporter and commentator. And tonight, I have with me Diallo Kenyatta. He has a show on YouTube called The Bro Diallo Show. And tonight we're going to discuss a topic that's pretty well known in the discourse that you see on the news and in politics in general, which is the topic of white privilege. Is it real? Is it a myth? Who benefits from it? Who does it harm? Diallo, can you please explain to our viewers what your show is about? Where can viewers find your past work?
Well, I do a broadcast 3 days a week on an AM signal here in Chicago, Q4 Radio, AM 1680. But we also broadcast. It's also a podcast, and you can find it live on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Central Standard Time. And also you can find it on diallokenyatta.com. You can also find archives there. I'm also across social media at Diallo Kenyatta. I also live broadcast a portion of the show on YouTube at Diallo Kenyatta on YouTube. And it's what I call a Pan-African perspective. It's basically a radical analysis of current events and history that advocates for the subversion of capitalism and global white domination.
So on your show, you've talked about white privilege being a myth. So why is that?
It's a myth because it doesn't exist. White privilege is actually more of a branding or a logo for something that is much more sinister and deleterious for not only the victims of what I call white aggression, but also for white people. Language, I mean, if you're familiar with Noam Chomsky and other linguists who understand the impact of language on politics and thus behavior, we tend to brand things that white people do, even when we're trying to criticize or condemn white behavior, we tend to brand it in ways that are somehow still favorable to white people. So we call things like, I also discourage people from using words, not just privilege, but supremacy or other, what would tend to be beneficial or complimentary titles to call out behaviors that are far from beneficial or complimentary.
I'm definitely familiar with that, and some of our viewers might be familiar with that work as well from Noam Chomsky, as you mentioned. But people will still say, well, what are you talking about? We see all the time on the news. We're seeing disproportionate amount of black people being killed and arrested by police officers compared to white people. White people are treated differently in certain respects. So how is that not an example of white privilege?
The reason it's not an example of white privilege is a privilege is something, as you imagine, that is awarded to someone or offered to someone, and it's generally associated with their appropriate behavior. As I say on my show, privilege is something I give my children when they behave themselves or they reach goals. When your opportunities, when your access, when your resources, when your benefits are based on the dehumanization, even the murder or the theft of people's resources, their lands, of other people, that is not a privilege. That is not something you've earned. That's something you've taken by force. Calling white behavior or the ability of white people to function in society without being molested, but other people who live in the society are constantly molested, dehumanized, stopped and frisked, or even murdered by the authorities, that is not privilege. Calling that privilege is akin to calling rape sexual privilege. So what I call that is white pathology. And one of the main reasons, my main concern with African people or people who are subject to what I call white aggression, what other people call white supremacy, what I call white domination or white aggression is when you define pathological behavior as a privilege, it evokes in the people who lack privilege a drive to secure that privilege. So if white people being able to navigate a society where they unjustly dominate, where they control a disproportionate amount of resources, where they have committed some of the grandest ongoing atrocities known to man, to define that as privilege, then you want, what do? You want to obtain privilege. So if my older son has the ability to have ice cream at night, my younger son's going to say, I want ice cream because that's a privilege. But if my son was, as a result, in order to get his ice cream, was exploiting, abusing, neglecting his younger brother, and I give him ice cream, that's not privilege, that's abuse. So 2 things, it's pathological behavior. If we call pathological behavior a privilege, it will provoke in the oppressed people a desire to behave that way, to adopt and win those benefits, and thus everybody's freaking pathological. So in so many ways, it's not a privilege when it is tied to the dehumanization, abuse, exploitation of others. It's pathological, it's exploitative. So you can call it white exploitation. I call it white pathology. It is not what we use in common lexicon or common language, a privilege, which is something that is earned, which is something that is a reward generally from behaving in a way that is constructive towards other people.
What would you say exactly needs to change here? Like, because we also see laws which might seem to appear to benefit white people. You know, there's not really any laws that discriminates against white people in terms of housing or, you know, getting car loans. So is that another, how is that again, like not a privilege? So you're saying it's a pathology. So explain how what we're seeing there in the terms of laws benefiting or seemingly benefiting white people, how is that a pathology?
The reason, what makes that pathological is that those rewards come at the expense of harming other people. If you gain your very self-identity is based on a lie. So I don't care if it's a lie. George Washington couldn't tell a lie when he cut down a cherry tree and he was an honest man, all the way up to the point where the average white American believes that their wealth and their status is based on their hard work, their sacrifice, their diligence, their adherence to moral values, and the Black poverty is based on us being lazy, single-parent household, and they ignore the mountain of evidence that systematic oppression, systematic racism, the theft of literally trillions of dollars of Black wealth, systematic theft through legal and extra-legal means from Black people being transferred to whites. None of that is based on hard work. None of that is truly earned. So it's pathological because, number one, it's based on a lie. Number two, it is perpetuated on a lie. And number three, when those lies become exposed, the people who are, no matter how much evidence is presented to the white population, they deny those lies. That is what is called the psychopathic racial personality. When a person is not aligned with reality, when a person doesn't have the ability to accept, engage with, and act upon facts, we say that that person is not mentally healthy. So there are many types of pathology, psychological and physical. So the concept that white people have that they are a privileged class, they are a more worthy class, that they are a superior race of people, in unto itself is a pathological. And it's also harmful to whites, as the harm manifests differently, you know. And I say, you know, often what separates the average Black from the average white is they get to go to Walmart and purchase more toxic goods than the average Black person. But the average white person doesn't really benefit from the status quo that far and above beyond the average Black person by and large, except for their consumption capacity. Anyway, so if you're really willing to destroy ecosystems and have your whole identity based on a lie so that you can buy extra stuff from multinational corporations, it seems absurd to me, but the main reason is pathological, is because to construct that notion of white privilege or white supremacy requires that white people literally behave and function like insane psychopathic individuals or collective.
Right. So then who benefits from this language like white privilege? How does this terminology benefit anybody?
Status quo, and it benefits the white elites above and beyond that. But it doesn't just benefit the white elites; it also benefits, the Arab oligarchs in Saudi Arabia, the Zionist leadership and elites, even the African neo-colonial leadership, or certain individuals. It mainly benefits those at the higher end of the income, the 1%. It keeps black folks and white folks at each other's throats and things of that nature, and all the, same things. So it benefits the people who set up the status quo. It benefits the economic, political, social, cultural elites above and beyond that. And then there is some, for lack of a better term, trickle down onto some other, the buffer class. But, it's pretty much the class and social hierarchy that it trickles down. But the vast majority, billions of people, suffer from this. And ultimately, depending on how you define wealth and how you define an enriched or life worth living, I would argue that no one truly benefits, because ultimately we're all doomed unless we can subvert this system.
Is this white pathology, is it only seen in white communities, or can this also be seen in non-white communities?
It manifests differently depending on how you identify in relation to the status quo and how the status quo identifies you. Race is a fiction. So there are people that if they go to certain parts of the world, they can be defined as white and non-white. White doesn't even mean anything. That's the insanity of it. There's no such thing as white. And so that's another thing. It's all constructed on a fiction and falsehood. And when we imagine false things to be real, we are in a state of insanity. So other people can benefit if they're willing to bow down and serve the power structure. Use Barack Obama as an example. He benefits from this sick, insane system to the tune of millions of dollars, global fame, the ability to literally get away with murder. So yes, non-white people are elites, not the black elites, the black bourgeoisie. They benefit, not to the tune of the white, but yes, also the Arab oligarchs, the Saudi oligarchs who are maintained in power south of the border, the oligarchical class that's in Venezuela cooperating with the U.S. intelligence agency to subvert the Bolivarian revolution. There are a lot of non-white people that derive benefit, but again, they represent the global minority, a very small, minute class of people.
So how can other leftist groups start adopting this as white pathology is the real root of the cause of what we're seeing in the world? We as a group of people aren't benefiting from things like climate change and ecocide and things like that, because that's gonna kill us all. So instead of really buying into this whole idea of privilege, how can other groups, how would you suggest to other groups to adopt this white pathology, replace it, white privilege with white pathology?
All you have to do is pretty much change the lexicon. Start calling it pathology. Start understanding that it's pathology. There's a book called, a couple of books. One is called The Iceman's Inheritance, written by a Canadian anthropologist, William Bradley. He talks about it, but there are also, you could also check out The Psychopathic Racial Personality, written by Dr. Bobby E. Wright, or Urugu, written by Dr. Marimba Ani, that really talk about, or, Derek Jensen touches on this in his 2-volume work, Endgame, where he talks about the death urge of Western culture. The only way for whites to really grasp this is for them to become radical. If you're not radical, then you're not truly a leftist. And what a radical means is looking at things at their very core. So you don't just look at the surface behavior, you look at what's underneath the behavior. So one thing leftist groups need to do is re-engage in both class analysis and re-embrace radical analysis and critical cultural critique and analysis. And it should guide them to those conclusions and stop using words like white supremacy, white supremacist, and white pathology, and start to call it white domination, white aggression, or white aggressor, and white pathology. And so when they start to change the language, because you'll find that the most virulent white supremacists embrace the title. You know, oh, yeah, I am a white supremacist because I argue that white people are supreme. And calling white people who aggress, steal other people's resources, commit atrocities, commit genocide on every populated landmass in the world, calling them supreme is like calling a serial rapist a sexual supremacist. We don't use those terminologies when people behave that way. We call them a sexual aggressor, a sexually violent sexual criminal, a sex criminal, but so we can call them race criminals, predatory race. If we change the terms to be more accurate and start using a more clinical language, I think that will start to better inform the behavior, because no one wants to be pathological. And that will also cure many of the people who are victims of oppression from trying to seek equality with their oppressors. Oh, well, if they have privilege and I'm denied privilege, then I start to behave like them to secure the privilege. I have to find someone to colonize. I have to go and be a business mogul. And then we start celebrating people from the oppressed groups, Africans and other non-whites who become billionaires. Oh, we get a list of Forbes produces a list of the wealthiest Black people, and Black people start to celebrate it. And then we find these wealthy Black people are invested in the military industrial complex. They're running sweatshops overseas. They're funding juntas and death squads. You know, they're signing, like Barack Obama signing off on drone bombing. So seeking equality with white people further puts the world's capacity to sustain life at risk. And even Dr. King said towards the end of his life, I feel like I'm integrating my people into a burning house, right? Because he realized that his lifelong pursuit of equality with the oppressor makes you equal to your oppressor. So I think first, change the language. Secondly, become more radical. Actually really understand leftist is not just using proper pronouns. Leftist is not just having sympathy for victims of American imperialism. Left is not just voting Democrat. Left means that you have an in-depth radical analysis, and your language informs your thinking and thus directs your actions. So start using those terms and start using the more clinically and historically and culturally accurate terms for these phenomenon.
Before we wrap up, can you just tell us again, where can people find you, and where can people watch your show and your previous work?
Oh, you can find me live at Q4 Radio, q4.org, broadcasting live. And it's also, I open the phones for calls. It's just a weekly radio broadcast. You can find archives of the show at diallokenyatta.com. They're right there on the homepage. Just scroll down and you can find archives. And also you can find, you can't find the full show on YouTube, but you can find extended segments of the show on YouTube. There's well over 100 shows uploaded to YouTube, and you can @Diallo Kenyatta, Twitter, Instagram, across social media, just @Diallo Kenyatta, or search the hashtag Bro Diallo, which is BRODIALLO, and then you can find some of my essays and writings and public talks. And in fact, I'm giving a talk in a couple of weeks on Black youth violence and gang violence in Chicago. So, you can just follow me across the social media. So I hope that helps everyone.
No, it definitely does. And I appreciate you taking the time to discuss this topic. And, white pathology is the underlying cause. And I hope our viewers will definitely look into the resources that you have provided for us. And again, thank you so much for joining Heartlands Media, and hopefully we'll chat soon.
Hey, did you like that video? Give us a sub, hit the bell for notification. You know how YouTube is. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and of course, go to hardlensmedia.com. We'll see you next video.